Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we are looking at Child of Alara. So this is a pretty unique deck. So first of all, let's just go over what Child of Alara does. It is a 5 different color, 5 mana creature, so Wooburg. It's a 6/6 with trample, and it says, when it dies, you destroy all non-land permanents that can't be regenerated. So when it dies, you sweep the field of all the non-land permanents. So the main strategy of this deck is going to be getting Child of Alara onto the field, having some kind of a sack outlet to get rid of it to trigger its death ability, but then we don't want to have to keep paying the 2 additional mana for the commander tax every time we want to replay Child of Alara, so we need to find ways to reanimate it for free. So we're going to keep doing that. Put Child of Alara into play, sack it, bring it back, blowing up all of our opponent's permanents except lands, and just keep doing that so that our opponents can never establish any sort of a board position, any value-based creatures or ramp cards, so like Mana Rocks, Mana Dorks, Rhystic Studies, various enchantments and artifacts that matter, all of those things will just get blown up. Now, of course, that puts a very tight deck building restriction on us, because since we're going to be blowing the field up over and over, we obviously can't be playing any non-land permanents that we care about, since they're going to die along with everything else. So first off, what are we going to do? So clearly we need ramp, so our ramp has to either be land-based, so cards like Explore or Farseek that just put lands onto the battlefield rather than having any sort of Mana Dorks or Mana Rocks, or we can play cards like Darksteel Ingot and Skyclave Relic that are going to be indestructible, and incidentally that's also going to apply to really any other threat or utility card that we want to keep around, so things like Klothys, which is also indestructible. So Klothys and the other gods, these things can be kept around because they're indestructible. So in Klothys' case, the majority of the time it's just going to be a ramp spell by exiling lands from the graveyard, but it can also deal damage to our opponents as the game goes on. And then again, the rest of this is just ways of putting lands into play for the most part. Then of course, we're going to want to have our sack outlets. So we've got all of these things, many of which are just ways of drawing cards. So there's things like Altar's Reap, Corrupted Conviction, Costly Plunder, Deadly Dispute, Fanatical Offering, Village Rites, and Reckoner's Bargain. All of these are ways of sacking our Child of Alara and then drawing 2 cards. Perilous Research also basically does the same thing. Going back to ramp spells, our Primal Growth has Kicker, which involves us sacking a creature. Nasty End will draw us 3 cards because it draws 3 if we sack a legendary creature, which Child of Alara is. And then apart from that, we've also got Bontu the Glorified. So this is basically a sack outlet that we can always have around because it's indestructible, although its ability isn't really that good. We've got Erebos Bleak-Hearted, which is both a sack outlet and a way to draw cards, and removal if we need that for some reason, but Child should blow up everything. And then Mogus, which will slowly whittle away our opponent's life. Then of course, since we don't want to pay the commander tax, we will need ways of reanimating Child of Alara right out of the graveyard. So we've got Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, Persist, Reanimate, so like the typical reanimation spells. Some other ones to note are things like Footsteps of the Goryo and Goryo's Vengeance, which can also reanimate Child of Alara and then sack it at end of turn, so it reanimates Child of Alara but then also causes it to die again. We've got Athreos Shroud Veiled, which is indestructible, and it says at the beginning of your end step, you put a coin counter on another target creature, and whenever a creature with a coin counter on it dies or is put into exile, but dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control. So it is a way to permanently have a way to reanimate Child of Alara, although it is expensive at 6 mana. Also, Loyal Retainers reanimates legendary creatures. Wake the Dead, we don't really care when we're reanimating the Child of Alara, so if we're going to reanimate it in an opponent's combat step, that's fine too. And those are all of our reanimation spells. Now, in addition to that, we also have what I'm calling timed reanimation spells. You might be more familiar with these as the Scam Enabler spells in the modern Scam deck. So these are cards like Feigned Death, Kaya's Ghost Form, Malakir Rebirth, Not Dead After All, Supernatural Stamina, Undying Evil, and Undying Malice, which will reanimate the creature when it dies. So the upside to these over the typical reanimation spells are that they are mostly cheaper, at all of them being 1 mana, but they're also specifically timing based where we have to sacrifice Child in the same turn as we cast these things. And it also means that if we put Child of Alara into the graveyard and we didn't have a way to reanimate it, then these don't reanimate it until we find a regular reanimation spell to put it back onto the battlefield. Now, apart from that, we have a few tutors. Again, things like Diabolic Intent are going to incidentally be better because they sack creatures. We've got some protection in anti-counter spells. Among our various lands, we do need some snow-covered lands in order to tutor up via our land-based ramp. We also want some land-based sack outlets, so things like Phyrexian Tower can just be around. And this is also going to be a useful card to tutor up with crop rotation, as is Cavern of Souls. Additionally, Forbidden Orchard is a way to fix rainbow mana, and we don't care about giving our opponent a 1/1 token because we're going to wrath it away anyway. Then some counter spells, you can suit these to your metagame as needed. And then of course the Thoracle Consult win con, because why not? We're in the colors and we do need a way to eventually win the game anyway. Then among our various card draw, we also have Life's Legacy here to draw more cards, although it is a sorcery, so that is a downside of it over the other sack outlets. And the One Ring is indestructible, so we can play that. And then a little bit of land ramp here via Explore and Growth Spiral, which functions a little bit differently than the tutor out of the library ramp spells. So again, the main strategy is going to be getting out Child of Alara, sacking and reanimating it over and over to continuously wipe the board so that our opponents can never develop any sort of a board position. Also, because opponents are going to commit various permanents to the board, it can just have us go way up on card advantage in terms of getting rid of so many of our opponent's resources. And they can never develop any sort of game plans that require that they have permanents in place. So obviously, apart from just hitting their ramp cards, we can also hit things like Underworld Breach or just any other permanent-based win con. If people have Kiki Jiki wins or anything like that, we can get rid of that. We can get rid of stacks pieces, etc. We're going to do that, continuously wiping the board, and then we can just win by either beating our opponents down with the 6/6 Child of Alara, or we can go for the Thoracle Consult win, or we can just slowly whittle away our opponent's health with Mogus. And yep, that is the Child of Alara deck.